Hi, this is Greg Remke, and I'm with Economic Thinking, and I'm doing a series of presentations for the Mackinac Center online debate workshop. This is the fourth on the economics of federal education policy reform. It's for the NSDA topic this year, and you can find out more at mackinac.org/debate. My background is in economics from the University of Washington, and I've worked for many years on the economics of different debate topics. And my goal is to sort of give you an introduction to some economic principles and to provide links to online resources that'll help you develop reform ideas on the topic. So one place to start, which I think is helpful, is just the idea of federal education funding as foreign aid. And I'll explain why I'm arguing this in this session, but I'm going to draw from the work of William Easterly, who worked for 20 years with the World Bank as a development economist. And Easterly traveled the world trying to carry out World Bank development plans in African countries, India, Latin America. In his book, The Elusive Quest for Growth, he basically discussed how all the things that went wrong, how much more complicated it was than he had expected as an academic economist, as a development planner, when they carried out various efforts to make improvements in different countries in agriculture, in industry, in education. And it was just more complicated than he thought. Later in The White Man's Burden, he makes a more controversial claim that the foreign aid program is in some way similar to the colonial project, which often had good intentions, the white man's burden of helping the poor people of the world, but it turned out to backfire in a great many ways. And Easterly, his thesis is that there's a huge distinction between the planners and the searchers. He argues that in developed economies and Western economies, in our history, the United States, Western Europe, more recently Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, prosperity came not through foreign planners and development aid, but came through the operations of searchers, local entrepreneurs, local innovators, people on the ground solving problems as they're trying to get ahead on their own. Very much as the Adam Smith economics idea that it's through the self-interest of business people that we get the bread and the other things that we want each day. And Easterly contrasts this with the planners, who are often well-intended, who have funding, who think they can jumpstart an economy by providing targeted aid to, let's say, the water system, or to the education system, or to agriculture. And he argues that these planners have caused a great deal of damage. In his foreign policy magazine article, The Ideology of Development, he argues that much of Islamic fundamentalism and communist, socialist, left-wing leadership in Latin America came in response to the foreign aid establishment and the Washington Consensus trying to force what they called free market reforms and privatization on countries, but were a kind of crony capitalism that backfired in various ways. So you can read more about that in his foreign policy article. Also, Planners versus the Searchers and Foreign Aid is an Asian Development Review, and you can find these at the links on this page. And the link should be active in the PDF handouts. So Easterly is arguing local enterprises and entrepreneurs, they've got local knowledge, and they're searchers trying to figure out how to solve problems. People from distant places often have trouble understanding the local issues that have to be dealt with. And so they push their plans that are preconceived, and again, they run crosswise to local incentives and information. And the claim I'm simply making that they're similar problems that federal education planners make with their programs. The Bush administration's No Child Left Behind was a policy recognizing that to help the lowest income students in the country, these are students that often move from school to school as their parents move from place to place during the school year. And so if they moved, the researchers noticed that like the low income classes, a whole bunch of the students were gone by the end of the school year. They were at some other school. So they wanted all the schools to be sort of run the same so the kids wouldn't be completely out of place at a different school district. Well, anyway, that was the top-down plan to try and solve that problem, but that created many other problems. And so critics, advocates liked that program, critics didn't. The Obama administration came with Common Core, and similarly, there were top-down efforts to do reforms. There were some, scholars and thoughtful aspects to Common Core, but the most successful aspects of Common Core have been when they deferred to local school districts and schools. But again, it's a broader debate on each of these things. The point I'm making is you want to look at anybody's proposal. Let's say the affirmative's proposing some new plan. You can come at that with the overview that Easterly gives on the planners versus the searchers. And of course, in the local school district, the local school, who are the searchers? Well, they're going to be teachers. So you want a way to empower teachers to discover solutions, to carry out solutions. You want good practices in education to spread around, but to try and do that from the top down is going to smother the fact that the students in one school are different from another and the local communities are different. So planners versus searchers, it's sort of an economic overview to look for enterprises and entrepreneurs rather than top-down planners at the federal level or even the state level. Okay, so the economics of education reform, background on sort of economics ideas. Economics turns on incentives and information challenges. One economist said, look, economics is about incentives, everything else is commentary. You're looking at what gives incentives for teachers to, do the best they can to try and solve problems, what gives incentives to students, to parents. And again, you have information challenges that's in this theme of local education searchers. They've got the incentives and the local information to try and deliver better educational services to students. Education planners and reformers, whether they're academics in the university or state or federal officials, they've got limited information of what's going on in a particular classroom or school district. They don't know the local students, teachers, and communities the way the local teachers do. So, and then another aspect of this challenge is in the delivery of education. We don't know, what's best any more than we would know, what's the best way to design a restaurant or a house or a retail store. In an open economy, a free society, we've got thousands of entrepreneurs trying new menus, trying new foods, trying new recipes. In housing and cars and any product you can imagine, we've got people trying new designs that better serve the customer, that are higher quality, lower prices. And again, a similar story with other products. So in terms of how to best deliver educational services to students, we don't know the answer. It might be a particular kind of school reform. It might be letting the kids out of school to do internships. It might be like the Khan Academy, flipping it where the kids do take the lectures at home online, and then in the classroom we're dealing with questions and doing homework. We can't know this. We want a system that flourishes by people trying to discover the best ways or ways that work better. So we want state and federal education reforms to encourage this discovery process, encourage innovative teachers, schools, education entrepreneurs. So what I'm going to do here is give a series of examples of this, again with links in the handout. You can click on the links to view more information, read the articles, or watch videos about these alternatives. This is an example from a school in Boston. Basically, a foundation working with a local entrepreneur and the local mayor created a new public school. It's not a charter school, a new high school just outside of Boston, entirely focused on what they call self-directed learning. Now, for debaters, this is a lot like debate. You research your topic, you build your topic. In a sense, your debate class is very much self-directed. And you might think, well, gosh, how could your history class or other classes be similar in being self-directed? The entrepreneur in this says, we think the future of learning doesn't look anything like a school where you're just sitting in a class listening to a lecture. Now, and that's not really what your debate class looks like, right? You've got some instruction from your debate coach or your teacher giving you an overview, but then the class often breaks up into working groups. Your older students, experienced students are talking to younger students. You're doing your own research. You're doing an actual debate and then commentary. There's a lot of things in debate class that don't look like an average classroom. And Resnick is saying here, not going to look like a school in the future. It's going to be similar to work in the sense of more ambiguous, much more interdisciplinary. In a debate class, you're actually working as legislators, right? You're researching topics, you're advocating, you're defending, you're, in a sense, pretending you're in the public policy world, the think tank world, or the legislative world. And you learn a lot doing that. In this case, this particular school outside Boston is inspired by actually people on the pretty far left who are advocating an alternative to the factory model of schools. Self-directed pioneers, John Holt, How Students Learn, Ivan Ilyich, Deschooling Society. So these are from a long time ago, and they're saying the schooling system was sort of smothering students. They should be out on their own, learning things in different ways. So the idea is that in this particular school, these kids are going to be on self-directed learning modules, and they're going to pick up the history, the math, the other things that a normal education requires, but they're going to do it through their own projects rather than through textbooks in a standard top-down way. And again, this is an experiment where the students volunteer to be in the school, the teachers choose who they're going to have, but again, it's an alternative to charter schools or private schooling or homeschooling. It's a public school that has this self-directed focus. So we'll have a chance to see the school opens in 2018. And the funding for it came from a grant from a foundation. And this is from their website, XQ Super School, that looks at this idea. They're having a big program September 8th on this, and you can learn more about it, I guess, online, but you can find out from their website. And again, they're calling for significant or radical reform of the school system, and you can see more about that there. Okay, another example, here's a school in Berlin that they say turning education upside down. Again, this is a project-directed school, and the example here is sort of interesting. There's a student traveling, and they don't have tickets. He basically convinces the train driver to give their whole team free tickets. They end up inviting him back to give motivational speeches to their 200 employees, and the kid's just 14. So this was an example of a school that's got students thinking differently right off the bat, and the article's arguing that this teenager's self-confidence, and again the link to the article here, comes from being at this unique institution where he's not trying to study the textbook and do good on tests, but actually working on different projects. There's no grades until the students turn 15, no timetables, no lecture instructions. Pupils decide what they want to pursue, and the teachers are the coaches directing their learning process. Here's a separate sort of example. This comes from PBS NewsHour, and it's looking at the school system as we have it now is often trying to push students toward college with the idea that you need a college degree to get ahead. And so therefore our high schools ideally are trying to find ways to get students to learn the basics so they can do well in college. Well, this article argues that really instead of pushing bachelor's degrees, we need more people with trades, with skills, and that those skills can be developed in high school in a very rewarding, highly paid careers that don't involve a traditional college education. I just met with a fellow a couple weeks ago who was one of the early people at Microsoft, and he did very well at Microsoft, worked at other tech firms, and then he took a position with a new company, just a tech company recently, and he had to have a college degree. So he had to figure out how to go online and get a college degree, and he's in his 40s. But he was very successful at the top of the tech world without a college degree, because in the computer world, most of the training is online, and you can get a college degree, but you don't have to. Microsoft provides training in Microsoft products, and other firms do as well. So again, high schools and colleges struggled for decades to get students into welding and nursing, but they haven't been very successful, and they've tried rebranding vocational courses and other sorts of things, but this article argues that you need new ways to try and draw people into these skill areas that aren't a complete substitute for a college degree, but the idea is they'll give people, for some people who are unhappy in the regular classroom, a trade, vocational education, can be more rewarding, and they can come back for their higher level degrees later. This is another video. This is Mike Rowe of the Dirtiest Jobs, and he argues we need more vocational training, and you can see his video, and he's giving some of the same ideas that are in this PBS NewsHour presentation. Again, the links are here to find more. Mike Rowe draws from Germany, where basically they have a mentorship or an internship program where people get advanced business training, but separate from the classroom college education. Another example, this is a Chicago school where they basically focus on internships at a low area of poor students, the Chicago Technical Academy. In this case, it was, I believe, a charter school. So this turnaround effort, project-based learning, again, similar project-based things. 90% of the kids were reduced price lunch. I've got an airport nearby, a plane going overhead. Free or reduced lunches, 14% of the kids classified as homeless. So it was founded in 2009 to teach skills for the tech sector, but it basically failed in its earlier years. They were about to close it down, and then it linked up with a school from San Diego called High Tech High. And this charter school network apparently has been very successful, and you can read more about High Tech High at their website. Again, the argument is there's the business world has changed. It's not like people are just going into everyday factories like they did in the past. Instead, we're in a different kind of economy, and allowing students to get hands-on education can facilitate their high school and college education. And so you can read, this is Atlantic has the article about student internships. So a broader background, so in the school reform movement or effort, there's one of the themes that I think is valuable for students to look at is a sort of not a battle, but a change between teachers and administrators. One of the challenges as we've rolled out more and more federal programs offering grants and assistance to state and local schools, these come with strings attached. There's got to be a way to measure, how the money's spent, if it was done the way it was supposed to, and then was it effective. And that means each school district and school's got to hire more administrators who are trying to track the programs, and the size of the administration increases over time. And a classic book in this was by John Chubb and Terry Moe called Politics, Markets, and American School. Came out, 27 years ago from the Brookings Institution, which is a center-left think tank in Washington. And it's not the standard book criticizing, government schools or criticizing unions. Instead, it was saying that, there's crummy schools in the private sector, there's crummy schools in the government sector, but there's similarities between successful schools, whether private or government, and they have to do with how the schools are managed. And one of the things John Chubb, in talking about his research, he talked about studying the New York City public schools and spending weeks tracking down, trying to find out how many administrators there were versus how many teachers. Because you've got a limited budget in the school, and the more money you're paying people who aren't teaching, the less money you have to pay teachers and to have teachers for the classroom. So he was trying to get, the data on the total number of administrators in the New York school system, New York City school system, and the total number of teachers. So that took him some time. He finally got his numbers, and then he wanted to compare it with the Catholic schools. New York City has a very large Catholic school system, so he called headquarters of the Catholic school system and asked the same question, explaining to the receptionist that he was looking to know the total number of administrators versus teachers. And there's a pause, and the lady says, well, if you'll hold on a minute, I'll count them. Right, so she's in a classroom, or she's in an administrative office, and she can stand up and just look around the room and count the administrators for the New York City Catholic school system. Again, the claim then that comes out, the broader, and this is again 27 years ago, is that the private schools, the Catholic schools, tended to have far more teachers and far fewer administrators. That's one of the reasons they were able to deliver more educational services at a lower cost. So, and he argues and again, this isn't directly a union issue, this is an issue of just how the schools are managed. So in this book, they argue that there's established interest trying to stop reforms. Again, the original book, some years old, There's a newer version, an updated essay. John Chubb passed away a couple years ago, and they were at Stanford before the Brookings book. Liberating Learning is the latest when they're looking at technology and other reforms for the school system. But I think for debaters looking at how, ways to reform the status quo, this is sort of the classic book from political science and economics on why the system has been bogged down the way it is and the obstacles to reform. And they talk about public choice theory and institutional resistance to education reform. You can also read a history of school choice. There's lots of different aspects to that, some positive, some not, and that's in a U.S. News and World Report article. Okay, so those more resources on the topic, and again for background. So more on this. So the next, sort of biggest story in education reform was a documentary, and it was done by the fellow who did Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth on Global Warming, someone with solid credentials from the left, an established filmmaker. And he did a second documentary called Waiting for Superman that was looking at the charter schools in New York City. This is 5 years old now. I remember watching Oprah Winfrey show, and there's Bill Gates of Microsoft, there's the director of the documentary, and then Oprah Winfrey, and in the audience were all the kids the parents of the children that are featured in this. And basically, the core idea is you've got some really underperforming schools, and those schools have been waiting decades for reform, and ignoring the broader debate about charter schools for overall for the middle income, upper income schools, for the very poor schools where they just have not been able to solve the problems of dysfunctional bureaucracy and so forth, letting students out of those schools into charters seems like a plausible idea. And again, this isn't conservatives arguing this. This is people of the left, people who represent, who are part of the lower income, trying to get out of their poor schools. And you can read the debate about it, but you can watch the trailer, Waiting for Superman. You can watch the documentary, and then Oprah Winfrey segments on this as well. Separate from this, one of the fellows who's featured in the documentary is Jeffrey Canada, who's been operating education reform efforts in Harlem, New York, for many years, and he has a TED Talk where he looks at some of the problems in the status quo and suggestions for reform. His program is Harlem Children's Zone, and he argues you need more money for early pre-K, and he talks about some of the reasons this is critical. You can read more about his education reform proposals and the model that he has and the arguments for reforming that. And again, in this case, I don't know where this person is ideologically, but he's arguing, that we've got to change, particularly for inner city schools, change the way education is delivered to students. And you can watch the TED video and read more online. There's a number of TED videos on education. This is just one. Now, this is about problems in the status quo. One of the things that's happened in schools for the lower performing students, unable to get out of the schools physically and to schools that might fit them better, instead they're being pushed into or drawn into online education. And that online education is problematic, according to this article in Slate magazine, that these kids are just put in front of a computer and they're getting very easy, what they call online credit recovery, where they take an online course and push buttons and all of a sudden they've passed the class and they get their degree or they get to advance. So the criticism of this, it's a long series called The Big Shortcut, looks at what's happening as the public schools are, he claims, abusing this online credit process. And of course, private firms are making a ton of money with this, as I understand it, to boost their graduation rates, but the students aren't really getting a good education. So the argument they make is the accreditation process should be better for these agencies, but the problem is the accreditation agencies are somehow tied in with these diploma mills, according to the article. And so a couple sources here. Ed Excellence is part of Fordham, the Thomas Fordham Institute, and you can read that or the Slate article to find out more. But the idea here is schools, hand out dubious credits to students who click through these online courses, and it's not clear that it's working. They argue it's a big scandal, and so for debaters, this is something you could look at reforming. Here's the, and by the way, I post on NCPA's Debate Central or send tweets on these things, and this is that article, but you can follow these links to find that as well. And again, the links will be in the handout with the overheads. The debating, I've said a number of positive things about charter schools and school choice. This is a debate that the Soho Forum hosted on July 11th with an the resolution is parents should have the choice to opt out of public schools and redirect taxpayer tuition money to their children to other approved schools. So you have an advocate of this, Bob Bowden, in the affirmative, and on the negative, Samuel Abrams. You can watch this video online. You can look at the background of the different speakers. And then they have what they do in the Soho Forum and other online debates. They have people vote what they believe ahead of the debate, and then people vote after the debate, and you could get a sense of whether people change their views through the debate process. So that's another resource for students looking at the debate over school choice. Oh, I guess that's the end. Thank you very much, and good luck with your debates and research. If you have questions, please feel free to send an email. Thank you. Bye.